Dave Filoni is a pretty bad writer. In case you don't know who Dave Filoni is, allow me to explain. Dave Filoni is the executive creative director at Lucasfilm. In short, meaning he has a ton of influence at the studio. He's been the showrunner for The Clone Wars, Rebels, Resistance, and The Mandalorian. He even had an influence on the sequel trilogy despite what some people may claim. As many are aware, the sequels have been the most controversial Star Wars trilogy since the prequels, which were the most controversial Star Wars trilogy since the originals. If you're beginning to sense a pattern here, you're not alone. I personally think the sequels are extremely flawed films that have caused damage to the IP as a whole, but if people enjoy the films, more power to them. But it's undeniable these movies cause issues within Lucasfilm and the fandom too, so it's worth bringing them up. The backlash these films received caused Lucasfilm to be sent into chaos, and thus causing them to give us the same dribble repackaged into a seemingly new product over and over again. And the fans become so complacent with Filoni's work, they eat it all up without question. So this brings us to the topic of today's video. My friends and I made this video to share our thoughts on the fandom's near-religious devotion to Filoni, and the double standards that exist within the fandom in regards to the flaws of his works, and why we think this could hurt the Star Wars brand going forward. It's very clear that Lucasfilm is trying to replicate the success of its sister studio, Marvel Studios, and their Marvel Cinematic Universe, with their clear attempts of making a Star Wars Cinematic Universe.
This won't work.
Please hear me out before immediately throwing away my argument as false because of any preconceived biases. Before I go too deep in this, I've been a Marvel fan for as long as I can remember, and believe me when I say I love the idea of other studios adopting the comic book storytelling format as much as Marvel Studios has. The idea I have with Lucasfilm attempting to do this with Star Wars is that Marvel isn't one franchise. Yes, they inhabit the same world, and the characters of course have massive crossovers, however those crossovers are done in organic ways. For example, Falcon and Ant-Man. If you've never seen any film by Marvel Studios and watch Ant-Man for the first time, you can simply assume that in this world where a cat burglar has a shrinking suit, there are people with jetpacks who are on a team of superheroes called the Avengers. And these are very intelligent and strong people, as hinted at by Scott.
Hey, how about the fact that I fought an Avenger and didn't die?
The existence of these superheroes and their own backstories are rarely integral to the story at hand, and thus the audience can reasonably infer the dynamics of the world. Outside of the main Avengers films, where you're expected to go into the film having seen everything, you can go into most films by Marvel Studios completely blind to the history of the universe and be able to understand the story and the world building perfectly fine. I don't need to see Ant-Man to understand Black Panther. I don't need to see Winter Soldier to watch Ragnarok. Now, what is Lucasfilm doing with their universe? Well, you need to see Clone Wars and Rebels to understand the Mandalorian and very likely the Ahsoka show too. Why is there a character who's so obsessed with the Darksaber? Why is she needed so badly? Why does she know Ahsoka? Why is there a Jedi surviving past the Jedi Purge? Please remember that a studio needs to not just appeal to older fans, but they also need to create new fans to keep their franchise alive. Hence why a character with a seemingly massive and complex history is able to resonate with generations of audiences, like Spider-Man. Imagine if Marvel only ever cared about making the hardcore fans happy and never bothering to reach out to new fans to ease them in. I can guarantee that most people who are watching this video and consider themselves fans of the webhead, they're fans because the films ease them into the mythos. Imagine if you needed to understand the complex history of Peter Parker and the Green Goblin to watch the first Raimi Spider-Man film. That film would have flopped. I could very easily see a future where Star Wars is kept in a perpetual circle jerk, where old ideas are recycled over and over again to appease the hardcore fans. Is that a self-sustaining business model? Imagine if Nintendo stopped making new consoles after the GameCube. Imagine if the Wii, Wii U, and Nintendo Switch were never made. Just imagine how different the world of gaming would be. Does this not seem like a horrible idea? To simply make one product forever and never truly branch out? The company would collapse. Do the current staff at Lucasfilm understand this seemingly basic principle? I truly hope that people don't try and strawman my argument in the comments or on social media, because these criticisms, if corrected by Lucasfilm, would benefit all of us. I've seen Disney and how they treat their subdivisions over the years, and do you know what happens to a studio or a department that underperforms under them? They get shut down. Does anybody remember Disney Interactive? Hand-Drawn Disney Animation, Blue Sky, Disney Toon Studios, Circle 7 Animation, Image Movers Digital, SIP Animation, Jumbo Pictures, LucasArts? Do you want this to happen to Lucasfilm? At the end of the day, Star Wars is one of many brands that Lucasfilm owns. The key word here is one of. Star Wars is one brand. We are constantly getting content churned out for, with a lack of care being put into them in comparison to the individual films. Consider that Lucasfilm has one creative team taking care of most things they produce. Meanwhile, other studios such as Marvel or Pixar have different creative teams for every project. Going back to the Nintendo analogy, imagine if not only did we never get any improvements beyond the GameCube, we also only got Mario games. No Zelda, no Metroid, no Pikmin, no Ratatouille tie-in Wii game? I ask you, my dear viewers, does this sound like a sustainable company? Does this sound like it can last, or at the very least generate a consistently solid output? The sad thing is that many fans seem to endlessly praise the works of Filoni, acting as if he can do no wrong. When it's something good from Lucasfilm, it's Filoni. When it's something bad, it's Kathleen Kennedy. Now, I don't want to see a single comment about me being a fan of Kennedy, because on my previous video's comment section, that was the ultimate straw man. I am not a fan of her leadership right now due to her enabling Filoni to do whatever he wants. Why praise this one individual so much? My favorite director of all time, Steven Spielberg, has made many mistakes over the course of his career. You will never see me trying to excuse content that by my own standards would be considered bad media. More fans need to consistently critique Filoni's works, by which I don't mean obsessively hating on him like Rian Johnson haters, but rather healthily discussing when his works are not up to the bar that people would otherwise hold other creators to. In short, Filoni has all the same faults that George Lucas, Rian Johnson, and J.J. Abrams or others have been accused of for having, and people excuse him for the flaws for some odd reason. I think this may be in part to Filoni also being a massive Star Wars fan himself, so much so that he has turned Star Wars into his own Wattpad fanfiction. He has his own OC that he has conveniently pop up everywhere. He falls into the fanfiction trap of constant cameos and fanservice, even though in a galaxy with trillions of life forms, it becomes very hard to justify the crossover, to outright messing up the original trilogy to help tell his own story. He is obsessed with what came before, without understanding what made his predecessors' films work so well. Here to discuss this further, I brought on my friend, Mr. Airborne.
Oh, hello there, boys and girls. Welcome to my section of C's video. I am Mr. Airborne, and I'll be your host as we take a deeper dive into more issues that encompass Dave Filoni's talents and creative strategies. So, relax, lay back, activate your minds, get your favorite brand of hot chocolate mix, and settle in. While there are many issues with Filoni and how he does his job at Lucasfilm, as the C points out, I think many of Filoni's core problems can be found within his writing, and how he fundamentally misunderstands much of Star Wars and the writing process in general. He will often sacrifice consistency of the plot, world, and characters in order to achieve payoffs that seem very solid on paper, but are shot through with flaws when you examine them on a deeper level. These issues permeate throughout The Mandalorian, Star Wars Rebels, and Star Wars The Clone Wars. I know many people have a great appreciation for The Clone Wars, and I used to be one of those people. But the more I think about how the show functions, the more I realize that it was written with the care and attention of a fanfiction, the quintessential example here being Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano as a concept is inherently broken. Let me explain. Throughout the prequel trilogy, an issue that Anakin has is that he feels that the Council doesn't trust him, and he's partially right. Obi-Wan initially considers him to be dangerous, Yoda senses grave danger in his future training, and Mace Windu never learns to trust him. The Council is suspicious of his friendship with Palpatine, they don't trust him with an individual assignment until he's 19, despite being one of the most quickly advancing Jedi in the Order, and they refuse to make him a master because they don't feel that he's ready. But in Star Wars The Clone Wars, not only do the Jedi trust Anakin with a Padawan of his own, but they actually orchestrate a plan to give him one, in the hopes that he'll learn to lose his fear of loss. The prequel trilogy would have you believe that the Jedi seem to be ignorant of the fact that Anakin has many issues when it comes to attachment, only having a general idea of it, but not taking many steps to help Anakin with it. This cements Anakin's feelings of isolation in Revenge of the Sith, not to mention part of his general disdain toward the Jedi Order. This element becomes far more confusing when you learn that the Jedi have been manipulating Anakin into trying to get rid of his attachment by giving him a responsibility that he's clearly not ready for yet. In Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan barely even trusts Anakin to go on a mission that entails nothing more than protecting an already highly guarded individual on their home planet. Now he's a supporter of the idea that Anakin should be given the same level of responsibility that Obi-Wan has, with much less time and training, and much more emotional instability. It's even implied that this was Obi-Wan's idea. With even just the idea of Ahsoka and how she's introduced into the canon, we have already created so many issues that contradict characters and create rifts in previously established facts. This is how Dave Filoni usually writes. He thinks about the payoffs that Ahsoka could bring without realizing the damage that the setup has already created. And yeah, he creates some pretty cool payoffs with Ahsoka, I won't deny him that. But the amount of problems that he caused in order to get there is indicative of his sloppy writing. And personally, I don't think the reward was worth it. Ahsoka has a few very good scenes in the Clone Wars, and it's kind of cool to see her mature as a person, but that's honestly the most that she gets. Her arc in seasons 1 through 5 is just about gaining more perspective as sort of an audience insert, which isn't a bad thing, nor would I say it's all that new in Star Wars, but it's almost all she has. I've seen a lot of people really give Ezra Bridger a hard time as a rather simple and uninteresting main character for a TV show, but I don't find many differences between him and Ahsoka on a structural level. I would even say that Ezra has objectively more dimension as a character. He learns to deal with the very idealistic and morally confusing teachings of the Jedi compared to his pragmatic personality as a result of his childhood. He tries his best to be a good son for Kanan because he never knew how to be one for his dead parents. He wants so badly to help the people around him, but will often lose the bigger picture due to his ideology of getting results first and asking questions later. And he builds a deep sense of community and family in the people around him, eventually sacrificing himself so that they could live to fight another day, in order to fulfill what he believes his parents would have wanted him to do. My theory is just that Ahsoka was put in stories with allegedly more interesting subject matter. She fights in large-scale battles in the Clone Wars, infiltrates a separatist prison complex, gets stuck on an island being hunted by Trandoshans, fights Mandalorian terrorists, leads an insurrectionist group against a separatist occupation, and gets involved in a political conspiracy meant to call up the Jedi for their warmongering. And all of this is cool enough, I suppose, but Ahsoka's character work isn't very substantive on its own. For example, in the Citadel arc in Season 3, Ahsoka wants to come with Anakin on a mission to rescue a Jedi Master from separatist captivity who has vital information for the war effort that he had personally memorized. But Anakin doesn't trust her with a mission as dangerous as this. But she sneaks along anyway, wanting to prove herself to Anakin using the excuse that Jedi Master Plo Koon approved of her going on the mission. Later in the mission, when they've almost escaped the planet with the Jedi Master, he dies in Ahsoka's arms, and she has to memorize the intel that he had. Later, Anakin asks Plo Koon if it's true that he gave her orders to join the mission, and wanting to keep her out of trouble, Plo Koon covers for her, despite it being a total lie. Now, Ahsoka went through a lot in this arc, witnessing the death of a Jedi before her and then bearing the responsibility of memorizing the Nexus root codes despite not being on the assignment in the first place. That's a lot of pressure to put on her. But I can't think of much that this does for a character in terms of development. They simply put her into a bad situation, and then she gets out of it. And we're meant to call this growth. They even ignore the fact that in this arc, Ahsoka takes her first ever life on the show. She straight up stabs Commander Sobek through the back with a lightsaber, and this sets the precedent from here on out that Ahsoka Tano is okay with killing people. But they don't bother to go into how this affects Ahsoka, or why she would begin crossing that line here when she wouldn't in the past. There is so much potential with expanding upon her character, but Dave and his team refuse to go further, in the hopes that her growing up will be enough substance for you to chew on in terms of character development. By the time we get to the episode where Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order, it really feels like this could be the prologue to her character arc, not the end or some sort of midpoint. There are arcs that definitely do develop her character as well as Anakin's very effectively. The second battle of Geonosis, Jedi Crash, and the Padawan Lost arc all give her added growth that is informed by her character and helps to set up payoffs that would come later in the show. But these are only a few moments within a show that often goes long stretches with giving her very little. To summarize, we have a very simple character who is decent overall but incredibly thin, and to create them we had to damage the world, characters, and the plot of the prequel trilogy. Was that worth it? I don't think so. Later in the video, the C is going to talk about Dave Filoni's problem with bringing back older characters, and that it's a major issue in how he creates stories. I can't think of a more fitting example of that pattern than the resurrection of Darth Maul in Star Wars The Clone Wars. It is baffling to me that people don't have more of a problem with this character. I know people say that it gives him more depth than the blank slate he was in The Phantom Menace, therefore improving his character, and that it gives Obi-Wan an emotionally compelling villain to go up against. But this was in the face of a resurrection that strains all possible suspension of disbelief. Maul was cut in half. His digestive system would be destroyed, and it would annihilate his bodily functions until he dies. The writers excuse this by saying that hatred kept his spirit intact, but that's a cop-out, and not at all supported by any other piece of Star Wars media.
I have died before.
Okay, well, none of the good ones anyway. Some would argue that the same happened for Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. He uses hatred to survive being burned to death, right? Well, you can survive being burned all over theoretically, and this damage destroyed his body for good, making it so that he needed to live in a suit. Maul is dead. End of story. Some of the same people who are fans of Dave Filoni's Darth Maul will attack characters like Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker for having a poorly written resurrection, yet excuse this. It's a double standard, and one that paints Filoni in a light he doesn't deserve. Going on record, the sequels are incredibly poorly written films, and worse than anything I have seen from Filoni. But his works still contain a lot of the issues that are present in those movies, and it's unfair to call them out in the sequels just because they're worse. Or even more concerning, because we dislike them more. This shockingly flawed resurrection alone would be damaging to any story you set up with him later, as his very presence is contrived. But it gets worse. As I said before, I don't believe simplicity is detrimental to quality, a lack of willingness to develop your character perhaps, but not simplicity itself. This is why Maul serves his purpose in The Phantom Menace just fine. a ruthless predator with a fearsome physicality and a cleverness in his fighting who was a disposable pawn for Palpatine. But furthermore, I would say that he doesn't gain much complexity from Star Wars The Clone Wars. His only main goals are surviving Palpatine's inevitable onslaught after he realizes that he needs to tie up Maul as a loose end, and wanting revenge on Kenobi by making him suffer. For such a confident, emotionless, and composed duelist who stared Obi-Wan dead in the face as he killed his master, I find it a bit weird that he would take such an incredible offense to his defeat at the hands of Kenobi. If anything, it would seem as if Maul would be more angry with himself for losing to a Padawan when he was able to handily dispatch his master. But instead, they decide to make this revenge story incredibly shallow, not to mention this story is often being peddled along by insane levels of contrivance. One of the most important arcs in the show is Maul's invasion of Mandalore and the political instability that rises from it. Maul, with the help of Death Watch, manages to take over Mandalore and usurp the throne of the pacifist government that can hold it for so long. He then betrays Pre Vizsla, the leader of the Death Watch, and takes over their clan, then squeezing Mandalore as a way to draw Kenobi out to him, which he does. He then kills Satine in front of Obi-Wan, which he believes will break him. After that, he gets beaten by Palpatine in a lightsaber fight and his brother dies. Let's break this down. Maul was last stranded in space due to the actions of Obi-Wan and Hondo Ohnaka, and he just so happens to get found by the Death Watch. It's convenient enough that anyone found them before they died in the vast expanse of space, but it happens to be people who not only have a shared hatred for Kenobi and require resources to capture Mandalore, which would allow Maul the connections he needs to lure in Kenobi, but their codes and traditions would also allow him to kill their leader and usurp him, allowing to gain a safety net from Palpatine. Not to mention, Pre Vizsla, a man who has recently been harmed for trusting figures like Dooku, gambles on the idea that people like Maul and Savage will be of use to them in their operations, and not a liability to their cause. He was willing to execute Ahsoka in Season 4 just for being a Jedi and interfering with the mass slaughter of a village, but he keeps Maul and Savage around because Dave Filoni needs them alive. This asinine setup leads to changes in the world, deaths of important characters, and radically altered circumstances for Maul. His resurrection, lack of solid characterization, and steps taken to force him to meet other prominent characters is yet again indicative of a pattern with Filoni, creating payoffs before earning them, and relying on the sheer presence of a character rather than writing them with consistency and progressing them meaningfully and cohesively. I know I just did a lot of complaining there, but I'm also willing to give credit where credit is due. In the sequel show, Star Wars Rebels, I found that Dave and his team achieved a lot, even with studio constraints and a very tight production schedule. There are a lot of really good episodes and storylines in Star Wars Rebels, and surprisingly, one of the best was Ahsoka Tano in Season 2. Ahsoka is brought back into the Star Wars canon with Rebels, being revealed as one of the leaders of Phoenix Group, a rebel cell. She then goes on a journey of discovery in the season while aiding the Ghost Crew in certain missions, coming closer and closer to a terrible revelation. As we learn in the episode Shroud of Darkness, Ahsoka has severe trauma and emotional issues from her leaving Anakin in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and blames herself for his death. Or even worse, his potential transformation into a monster, Darth Vader. It's a very solid continuation of her plotline from The Clone Wars, especially given Ahsoka's character history. She often sees signs of Anakin's turn, but isn't exactly sure what they mean. She knew Anakin was different, but too naive to know how significant that would be. So the fear looming in the back of her mind along with her denial of any of it being true makes a lot of sense. It's a very natural point to pick up where we left off in Season 5. Unlike, this search for the truth culminates with her confrontation with Darth Vader in a Sith temple on Malachor, where the Emperor foresaw that she would be. Vader tells her that if she does not join him, she'll be destroyed, just like Anakin Skywalker. Ahsoka vows to avenge his death, with her crowd-pleasing one-liner.
Revenge is not the Jedi way.
I am no Jedi.
It's a line that tracks with how she feels about the Jedi Order while also giving her more agency and complexity than before. She is confident in her decision to leave the Order behind and believes that it has made her a stronger person, someone who is willing to face her demons and accept who she is, even if she was confused before. It also shows that, like her master before her, she is willing to forego the principles of the Jedi to achieve her goals, something she previously didn't like the idea of in the later seasons of the Clone Wars. The things she feels about Anakin, the long-lasting weight it has put on her soul, go beyond the teachings that she has absorbed. But even when she learns that Vader is indeed Anakin, she realizes that it's her destiny and her duty to stay with Anakin to protect Ezra and Kanan. She's fulfilling something she wasn't strong enough to do before, and doing it in the name of something truly noble. A decision made out of clarity and compassion, not fear and confusion. These are, hands down, her best moments in her entire runtime as a character. And that's not all. Maul has also improved in Rebels, with his narrow-minded goal of just wanting Obi-Wan to suffer turned into a very intriguing psychological trait. In his attempts to break Obi-Wan Kenobi, he has lost his brother, been tortured many times, was too late to stop his master from taking over the galaxy, and now has been starving for years on Malachor. He has nothing left, and is now being driven mad by the idea that Kenobi might not be alive. Why? Well, Maul needs a reason to live. He has lost so much and suffered so intensely that he is borderline suicidal. But if Kenobi is alive, he has a reason to keep going. This obsession that he has created is still valid if Kenobi is alive. Everything he did might be worth it if he's still alive. So even when he loses to Obi-Wan, he accepts it in a moment of clarity and realization, and he dies somewhat peacefully, knowing that someone will avenge him for everything he has suffered through. In general, I feel most of the cameos in Rebels are justified through strong writing. Not all of them, but most of them. Bail Organa is the main provider of supplies for the Ghost Crew in Season 2, and he needs someone to send Rebels new ships with a bit of trickery and bravery involved. Send Leia Organa. The Inquisitor fails to capture Kanan and Ezra. Vader shows up. The Rebels need some more supplies for the war effort, while Champ Syndulla is in charge of a Rebel cell on Ryloth, and so he can show up. The Empire suspects that the Rebels are beginning to group up in a much larger force. Introduce the Master Tactician in the Empire to thwart them. A solid way to introduce Disney canon Thrawn. However, Rebels has issues of its own when it comes to Filoni's writing. At the end of Season 2, you can see Ahsoka walking back into the Sith Temple that she supposedly died in, which isn't a huge issue. After all, Vader survived the explosion, albeit with some decent injuries, so I could see her surviving as well, though it's unlikely. Season 4 explains that she was saved through time travel. The Ghost Crew infiltrated an Imperial dig site, and Ezra entered a portal into a pocket dimension, which seems to be a place connecting different Force nexuses around the world. And this bird, the servant of the daughter, leads Ezra to a portal that would allow him to keep her alive. Why is the servant there? Well, because the bird is a spirit guide. Since when? Now, in terms of these portals being able to reach different locations in time, why was Ezra specifically led to a portal that had Ahsoka moments before her would-be death, where she can no longer change the timeline? Are any of the mechanics explained to make this less convenient at all? Well, no. Not really. I guess I can kind of excuse it by saying that the World Between Worlds is a closed-loop sort of timeline, and the temple was destroyed shortly thereafter, but it's still pretty contrived. But what comes after is even worse. Despite now being confirmed to be alive during the period of the OT, Ahsoka Tano is not in the OT. Despite the fact that she is alive and has connections to the group that was directly responsible for starting the Rebel cell that we see in the OT. Despite the fact that there are threats like Vader and the Emperor that she is aware of and that she would have had the chance of fighting if she joined the Rebel cell. Yes, I understand looking for Ezra is relatively important. He shot into hyperspace with Grand Admiral Thrawn into what could be the middle of nowhere and could be in grave danger, and she would feel indebted to him for saving her life. But Ezra made a sacrifice to ensure that the others could fight on. Even Sabine Wren understood that, and she was the person Ezra wanted to find him. Ahsoka should understand that winning the Galactic Civil War takes precedence over finding one Jedi. Imagine just how much the stakes of the OT would change if Ahsoka were part of the Rebel Alliance. Vader's motivations could change if he knew of her existence. She could have dynamics with people like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. She could cross paths with the Emperor. The rebellion was so desperate that they were willing to drag an old man in the desert out from hiding to help in their war effort. Imagine what someone in her near prime could be like. You could argue that this is Season 2's fault for having her alive at all, but you could still bring her back in a way that explains her absence from the OT. Season 4 does not. This is a complete mismanagement of character writing, and it creates a massive contrivance in one of the foundational works of the franchise. All because Filoni wanted this massive reveal of Ahsoka living. It was all about pulling the heartstrings, not the functionality of the script, and that is very annoying. But this wasn't enough for Ahsoka Tano in Disney canon. People wanted more. Filoni wanted more. The fabled Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7 was finally released, although it was only a fraction of the prepared storylines for the remainder of the show. Still, it was a chance to continue many of the storylines that had to be dropped due to its cancellation. Unfortunately, this complicates things, as Star Wars Rebels was written with the idea in mind that the Clone Wars was never going to be finished, and so it brought back and concluded, or at least continued, many of the plotlines from the Clone Wars. So now you had to not only fit this finale in with the continuity of Star Wars The Clone Wars and Rebels, but Filoni was going to have to justify having what was now simply a story meant to fill a gap that has become somewhat redundant due to the way Rebels has been written. Not to mention, the story was already described in the novel Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston, so now they were writing this over and replacing it with something new. I have no thoughts on the Bad Batch or the Martez Sisters arcs, with the exception of one short point that I have to make. They're both just backdoor pilots to a show I have no interest in watching. But the Siege of Mandalore is definitely something that needs to be discussed. Ahsoka Tano is back to save the day for Maul. Why? Because she just so happened to run into Bo-Katan while on Obadiah. Which is relatively fine, I suppose. Bo-Katan and the Night Owls are fighting against Maul, and evidently they have a mission there involving the Pikes, who are connected to Maul. So the only real convenience here is timing, which is still an issue, but nothing extreme. However, Bo-Katan then recruits Ahsoka for a cause, and she accepts it.
What?
Why would Ahsoka ever be sympathetic to Bo-Katan's cause? From her experience, she belongs to a Mandalorian terrorist group who are hell-bent on taking over Mandalore through violence, and these people are okay with slaughtering villages of innocents just to send a message. They are brutal, malicious killers. But because she thinks that Maul is a threat, I guess, she decides to go along with her. She meets with Obi-Wan and Anakin to try and recruit them, but unfortunately the Chancellor has just been kidnapped, and the two are called back to help him. Ahsoka accuses them of playing politics when they make this decision, even though, if the Chancellor is captured from their perspective, the Republic might lose the war, which would be disastrous. Not to mention the capital of the Republic is under siege, it could lead to devastating losses. Abandoning Mandalore might be bad for Mandalore, but this could be so much worse. And again, this would be in support of a cause led by the Death Watch. But she's given a detachment of troopers anyway, so all's well. Minus Ahsoka's moral compass. Again. As hinted at before, Maul is back, and this time he actually has a plan. He wants to squeeze Mandalore dry to lure Kenobi back there with Anakin Skywalker, because he foresaw that Anakin would turn. Wait, this is the same plan as last time, only with Anakin in it. And now he doesn't have Satine as leverage. And of course, his plan fails because Anakin and Obi-Wan aren't there, only Ahsoka. Big surprise. And then they have a fight at some point, and Maul wins, right? He absolutely should. He's beaten both Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi in fights before, and only lost the first time due to some very unfortunate circumstances. He's held his own against Darth Sidious, and in general just has more years of experience. Yeah, he loses. I won't say that Ahsoka is a bad fighter. She's relatively competent. But she hasn't really trained in a while, and the last time Ahsoka fought, she got absolutely destroyed by Barriss Offee, another character that hasn't been shown to be an amazing duelist in any capacity whatsoever. This fight should be over fast, but it's not. In fact, it drags out long enough for Ahsoka to miraculously gain the upper hand. But it isn't over. Remember when I said that this season had to accomplish 3 things? Continuity with the Clone Wars, continuity with Rebels, and justifying its own existence? Well, here's where we get to Rebels. In that show, the character of Kanan, a Jedi, struggles to get along with Rex due to his trauma with the clones and how they killed off his master. But Rex reassures him that he didn't betray his Jedi general. He apparently removed his control chip, along with Commander Wolffe and Captain Gregor. Well, he was blatantly lying. Rex did not remove his chip. He did betray Ahsoka, and he had to have it removed for him. So in context, it makes Rex seem like a borderline gaslighter for being perplexed why Kanan doesn't trust him for a while, even though he would know full well why. He did the very thing that Kanan hates the clones for. However, it is nice that Ahsoka and Rex, once both fully aware of what's going on, do their absolute best not to kill any of the clone troopers. They understand that it's not their choice, and that these are still their friends. Which is why Ahsoka releases Maul into the ship to kill as many clones as possible. She was willing to let hundreds of her comrades die just for a better chance at figuring out what Rex told her before he tried to kill her. An absolutely unprecedented reversal of her morality, and what can only be described as blatant cold-blooded slaughter. How embarrassing for her character. The last show that I have watched recently that has had Dave Filoni's hands on it is The Mandalorian. The story of a bounty hunter and his Baby Yoda companion going around the galaxy doing odd jobs and tackling threats. It was kind of a cute idea. The first season was rather mediocre, but I think it had room to grow, and it could have become something special. I have little hope that it would, but there is potential. Season 2 took that potential and threw it into the garbage. The show now revolves nearly entirely around bringing back older characters and having them point the main character towards a different destination, and this is done through an incredibly convenient series of events. In the beginning of Season 2, Din Djarin encounters a man named Cobb Vanth, who happened to come across Boba Fett's Mandalorian armor. This isn't so bad until it's revealed that Boba Fett now decides to track Din's ship throughout the galaxy to reclaim his armor. Why he didn't ask it from Cobb Vanth, or how he was even able to track Din for all this distance is entirely unexplained. But what is the reason that Din is traveling all around the galaxy? Well, he's in search of a Mandalorian, and a woman he knows in Tatooine is apparently in contact with someone who knows a Mandalorian, which is lucky, but not necessarily impossible. Though unlike in previous shows, this one goes to great lengths to make it seem like the Mandalorians are a near-extinct breed who rarely ever come out of hiding. But this person he meets doesn't just know any ordinary Mandalorian, she knows, or at least knows of, Bo-Katan, who is not only probably the most significant Mandalorian left alive, but also just happens to know of a Jedi named Ahsoka Tano, as well as her location. Need I remind you, these two came into close contact because of the Clone Wars Season 7, and it was in a way that contradicted Ahsoka Tano's character. The convenience that he met a Mandalorian who knows a Jedi is already pretty major, regardless of how few of them there are left. But to remember that the circumstances behind the fact that this character knows a Jedi are completely illogical just compounds the scope of the terribly cheap writing of this Star Wars TV universe. After that, he meets Ahsoka Tano and she directs them to Tython, where Boba Fett finally meets up with them, and I would like to remind everyone that it seems pretty much impossible that he could do this. Not to mention, it's rather convenient that he picked now as the time for when he should threaten Mando for his armor back, otherwise the plot could change dramatically. But even more than that, when Din places Grogu on a stone, it calls out to any surviving Jedi, drawing them towards the person who was placed on it. This happens to attract the attention of Luke Skywalker, who follows them to a ship that they commandeer in the finale of Season 2. Again I ask, where does the timetable on Luke getting here? What if he had reached the ship earlier? Would he have called in the Republic? Would he have attempted to negotiate with Moff Gideon? Would he have attempted to take on the entire ship by himself? This is all made worse by the fact that Luke showing up to rescue our hero should be entirely unnecessary. If Din Djarin hadn't forgotten his backpack after he took it off to appease Boba Fett in a confrontation with him, he would have reached Grogu in time to rescue him from the Imperial droids that tried to kidnap him. But we needed to have this awesome moment where Luke Skywalker shows up and kills a bunch of droids, because that's really cool. It's perfectly acceptable to create any level of contrivance as necessary to accomplish this, so long as people get to relive their childhood through shows that substitute merit for references, hollow emotional payoffs, and cool fight scenes. Well, I think that's about all the time I have. I'm going to turn the video back over to the sea, and I hope you found our time together to be enlightening. Have a good day.
The entire reason I reconsidered my thoughts on Filoni was this one little show you may or may not remember had come out last year. And I do mean you may or may not remember it, because it seems that outside of the hardcore sections of the fandom, this show left little impact. I'm talking, of course, about The Bad Batch. For those people lucky enough to have not seen the show, The Bad Batch is a series about a grizzled mentor figure taking on a child audience insert character, where they learn to become a father for said insert character. Oh, sorry, am I not being specific enough? I didn't realize that general plot description fits every other Star Wars series Filoni has ever worked on. Filoni is what the kids call these days a one-trick pony. There is no way around this. The guy simply lacks the drive or the power to make something that is actually new, outside of changing some surface-level details such as the backstory for the mentor figure being a Jedi, or a man raised from his childhood to be a powerful warrior. Oh, and let's not forget how unique the settings are. Have you ever seen a desert in Star Wars? Yes, many times. How about a forest? Yes, many times. How about a snow planet? Yes, many times. Are you getting my point now? This is my issue with Filoni. He only does what is known and established, never wanting to branch out. Is this what Lucas wanted? After A New Hope, did he make another story about Luke blowing up a big ship in space and exploring a desert planet with some old guy? No, he went to a swamp world to train with the illegitimate love child of Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy and gets his hand sliced off by Darth Vader. Not only does this do a poor job of telling new and compelling stories, he also does a really poor job of handling cameos. And yes, they are cameos, don't even try to argue on that with me. Imagine this. You're going on a walk outside and you bump into Obama. That would be crazy, right? Obama then tells you to go visit some village in eastern Siberia. That's a little weird, but okay. And there you bump into your good old friend, Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil tells you to go visit one of his favorite Chinese restaurants in Fresno. And you go to that Chinese place, and all of a sudden, you bump into Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, now this is where things get really weird, because your kid gets stolen, you team up with Dr. Phil and Arnold Schwarzenegger to save your kid. And at the last possible minute in your escape plan, Jesus Christ himself shows up to kick some ass and save you and your kid. That's quite a few famous faces to be meeting up with in such a short span of time. Almost on a mathematically unlikely level, to a point where it almost seems forced. This is The Mandalorian Season 2. The world building of the Star Wars galaxy took a major hit from this choice. This isn't world building, this is laziness. Every time somebody praises his storytelling, a Christmas elf dies. Filoni has also never really ended his stories. Clone Wars? Cancelled. Rebels? Ends on a cliffhanger for spin-offs. Mandalorian? Still running, even though the main point of the show has been fulfilled. Bad Batch? Sadly still running. Even with Clone Wars coming back, he got the ideas for the ending from another author and had a rough roadmap for how the series would end, given that Ahsoka, Rex, and Maul all show up in Rebels. I hate to be this guy, but he's almost as good at ending a story as J.J. Abrams. Is this the guy people want to be running the entirety of Lucasfilm? Let us not forget how his characters are generally very one-note. Now, I get that not every character in media has to have some super complex story or anything, but most of Filoni's original characters are paper-thin, with very basic motivations. Hunter, leader. Wrecker, strong, funny guy. Tech, smart one. Echo, be honest with yourselves. Do you remember Echo doing anything in the Bad Batch? Do you remember a single quote by him? Hell, what about the characters who aren't exclusive to the Bad Batch, such as Zeb or Ahsoka? Like Mr. Airborne said earlier, Ahsoka does not have much worth in terms of characterization. She's simply an audience insert. Meanwhile, other shows and films have much better child audience insert characters, such as John Connor or Frodo Baggins. I'm not asking for every character to be Michael Corleone, but I'm simply asking that the characters be a bit deeper than agents by which the plot is driven forward. By far, the character that pissed me off the most was Omega. Omega is the third in a long line of generic child audience insert characters. Now, this is in no way me saying I dislike Michelle Ang for voicing her, or that I want any hate to be sent to the creators or writers. Given that this is season 1, I could very easily have my thoughts change about the character in the coming years. However, as of right now, I am very displeased with what has been given to us. I don't like that Filoni and company just gave us the same product repackaged and handed it to us on a silver platter, expecting the audience to eat it up without question. And this is the case where we have another Ahsoka-type character, with minimal motivation for any of her actions, having plots that leave no lasting impact on her character. Honestly, I think that at this point, the shows are just trying to write off production quality instead of the actual talent with the writing. This is a damn shame considering that on a strictly technical level, many Star Wars films in the franchise have not aged that well. But at the very least, they had solid enough stories to help cement them as pop cultural mainstays. Now, with that being said, what lies in store for the future of Star Wars? Well, truth be told, the past is dictating the future, now more than ever. Do you guys like Lando? Ahsoka? Cassian? Boba Fett? While we have some upcoming projects like Star Wars Eclipse and Acolyte, which are set in new eras with new characters, we're getting a surplus of content that is simply coasting on nostalgia for viewership. Some of you guys might not want to admit this, but the Disney executives don't care about artistic integrity. They don't care about what is actually best for the franchise. If Dave Filoni is controversy-free and makes shows that are inoffensive dribble, they will support that. So here we are now with a studio that was founded in order for Lucas to avoid corporate filmmaking, that is now making the most corporate media imaginable. I can't speak for Lucas, but I think that it's safe to say he would not be pleased with the current direction of the company. Lucas himself stated that he never wanted to make a prequel trilogy of simply Darth Vader going around killing people, but rather he wanted to tell a story of a young man being doomed to a life of pain and loss because of his horrific childhood experiences. But now, Star Wars media seems to be more concerned with asking, "Hey, have you seen Star Wars?" So here we are at the end of all things. Beginning of 2022. The future looks bleak. All I see over the years are projects consuming resources that could easily be allocated to something that could truly improve the brand. But rather, we have self-absorbed content that is more concerned with referencing Star Wars rather than being Star Wars. These shows are not what Star Wars should be. They're not what Lucas would have wanted. And they're not going to help the series in any way. As stated previously, all these shows do is, at best, nothing, and at worst, outright actively damaging the films and their place in the universe. What we need from Lucasfilm Dave Filoni is true storytelling. Not more plot threads that go nowhere, no more sequel baiting, and no more relentless self-indulgence. They've copied Marvel on a surface level, not even attempting to take the world-building tactics or brand management that Marvel so generously applies. As much as I loved the GameCube as a kid, I prefer the innovations that we got from the Nintendo Switch. Can we have something new, please? Dave Filoni, I doubt you're watching this, but if I can give you one message, I just want to say, I hope you take some risks and experiment, because I believe that you have a ton of potential. And my message to the fans, have some standards. I'm not saying you should hate everything, but I am saying that people should separate their own personal thoughts on something from objective quality. You can still like something and acknowledge when it has flaws. I just hope Star Wars becomes good again.